Welcome to Ecologic for the first program in 2017. Winter is here. I'm convinced the winter is pretty much over. The azaleas are blooming and the ducks are gone. Two pretty good indicators. We're fortunate to have with us Dennis Sullivan, who is the chairman, president of Trees Acadiana, a group that's had a long history in Lafayette and working to plant trees, to give out trees at International Festival Acadiana. These are trees that we pot and give out different varieties and so forth. And so Dennis has been the chairman, I guess, for almost a year. Share with us a little of the history of Trees Acadiana and what Trees Acadiana does.
Well, what Trees Acadiana does is promote the vitality of the trees that already exist in our community and encourage tree growth by planting younger trees in selected locations that will make it obvious to people the advantages of tree planting. And as far as the history, Harold, where I started and where I remember is planting around the Cajun Dome. It was a family affair. I think I grew up planting trees with my father, and for that reason thought it was an important thing to pass on to my children. So they were out there, and there were many kids that day outside the Cajun Dome, and we were planting in the parking lots. And those trees are probably 30 or 40 feet tall now, and providing some nice shade if you're over there during the daytime parked underneath one of our trees. And so it was easy to get started with Trees Acadiana. Where, as far as the, don't you know where it went back, where the very beginning
Pierce
was?
Milliton, architect here in town, very active person in the community, did a lot of public works projects in Lafayette and the surrounds. He had a passion for saving oak trees, live oaks. He was convinced that's the history of Louisiana, and so he was very successful, often in contacting developers and saying, "Can we save some of these trees? Do we have to take them all out?" And some of them that he saved were the ones at Walmart near Broussard. The Walmart in Abbeville, they saved about 7 or 8 live oaks in front of that, maybe more. And, he set an example that, preserving the trees enhanced the property. It took away the harshness of big square buildings sitting in the sun. And believe it or not, people they want to park under those trees all the time. That's the first parking spot of the day.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So tree preservation goes way back in Lafayette, and he realized that they needed an organization that would promote and maintain the urban and the rural forest around us. And when the hurricanes come, we lose a bunch. We lose them to construction, and he was convinced that we needed to have a no net loss policy of trees. If we lose a bunch of trees, we should be planting as much as we lose or more. And we lose them to highways and to...
Didn't that ultimately get incorporated in our city's building codes such that,
yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So the trees play a very important role in our community. It's habitat for wildlife, and it's the trees are the lungs of the earth. They take in carbon dioxide and release oxygen. So one growing full-size tree will clean the air for 50 running automobiles. So when you take out a bunch of trees, you're hurting air quality. When you're planting them, you're helping air quality. So it's super important that we maintain this no net loss of trees. And in line with that, Trees Acadiana has been a part of the community to preserve trees, to especially look at public trees, the treasure that we have in public trees, in parks and so forth. With the help of the Scouts and Eagle Scout, we inventoried the trees at the new Horse Farm Park. And we thought there was 500 or 600 trees there. There were over 2,000 of 56 different species. So it's...
Yeah, that was a significant effort. I remember going out there.
It was. I mean, we thought we'd do that in a weekend. It took 4 or 5 weekends
Yep.
with 15, 20 volunteers each, locating these trees, measuring them, looking at the condition of them.
And with today's technology, we had GPS units, and we were able to keep to map the whole project. It tracked us as we moved around through in our different teams, and then each time we stopped and hovered next to a tree, it cataloged where that particular location was, and we recorded the information. That was an interesting effort. Eagle Scout project, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And I have some family history. My grandmother's sister, Aunt Marie, lived there, and her husband worked for UL. And I can remember some of the pecans that were the most productive on our family place where my grandmother lived off of Carmel Avenue, Burbridge Road, were the exact same pecans that came from the horse farm.
Really?
They have these big, long, pretty pecans, and there was some round native pecans that were just delicious and very tasty and very prolific. Produced pecans like, would cover the ground with them. Those same trees are at the horse farm. And
Well,
I
that
know
was-
my grandmother got them. She found sprouts and she'd dig them up and then go plant them. And so planting a tree pays dividends a long ways. And some of the things, some of the projects that Trees Acadiana has done are really outstanding. The one along Garfield, they planted about 50 trees.
The Garfield project was a lot of fun because we worked with the UL students. I don't know who did that connection, Harold, but it was a significant connection. We got the ecology group from UL to plant with us, and they came out. So it was more of a generational spread than we sometimes see. Not that Trees Acadiana members or codgers in any way, shape, or form, but don't misunderstand me. But that was a good spread that day, and we did it was a chilly day as I remember it, and
Yes.
And yet we were able to plant a whole string of wonderful trees down on that Garfield by the railroad track on Garfield, and the only ones that didn't last were some citrus that we planted on the other side of the road, and
And
they
some
must
of I guess some of them need the citrus more than we
needed the
did.
citrus too much for their
Yeah.
family, and
Yeah.
That's what happened. But
They transplanted them maybe to more productive sites.
is that what
That's
happened,
what
Harold?
happened,
And
I
I'm glad
believe,
that
right.
they had that, they cared
Hopefully
that
they're
much.
producing citrus
Yeah,
for
they
them.
are, and maybe we'll get a call someday,
Right,
or maybe there'll be a mystery bucket of citrus on our front porch one day.
And in line with citrus planting an edible forest, so to speak. We've done this at Girard Park through an Eagle project, and where Trees Acadiana is working with Scouts to often provide the trees and mulch and the expertise and know-how, the where to and so forth to plant
And
them.
Acadiana Nature Station, we planted
Acadiana.
citrus there recently. I'm overdue to go back out there and check that location and see how they're doing. It was a very dry, after we planted it, turned out to be a very dry spring last year, but
I think
they
they're
did-
doing fine. The ones
yeah.
on Surrey, we planted a bunch of citrus on that
Yeah.
one. And, of course, the oak tree planting, we planted Louisiana Avenue,
It's such a
north
neat
of
thing.
I-10 and south of I-10.
Yeah.
And those are big trees now. They're getting bigger and bigger.
South of I-10 citrus?
No, this
No.
was all oak trees.
Right,
live
yeah,
oak
that was a
trees.
good project. We did quite a bit on Louisiana Avenue exit there by the new interstate. We planted, that's where we planted the original Pierce Melaton memorial
Right.
planting. There's a nice, I don't know, is it engraved? It's a wonderful
Yes, there's a
sign,
memorial
a
to
memorial
Pierce Melton.
sign, yeah. Was that who made that? Was it?
I
It
think
looks
it
like
was
a Begno.
Begno
Yeah.
Manufacturing made
Yeah,
it.
it's got
right.
something wonderfully artistic and Begno-ish about it. But anyway, it was, so it announces the Pierce Melton run there, and those trees are growing rather strong. And then we made 2 or 3 subsequent plantings north of 10. And we're gonna do one too. It was actually gonna be yesterday, but the weather didn't allow us the prep work of getting everything, is it lottied? Make sure that we don't have any buried wires and we know where
We
everything is.
don't want to break
before.
into any gas
Yeah,
lines.
but it's gonna be Pont des Moutons from the hill, from the highland where Louisiana Avenue comes down and runs down to Louisiana Avenue. And that'll be a planting of some significant trees. So be watching your community bulletin boards and people who are on our phone list will be deciding on a new time to do that planting as soon as we've got the right weather and the right prep.
Planting preservation, we got in a couple of years ago, it's been 5 years ago, got in a battle with the traffic circle that was being planned for Youngsville.
That was kind of
battle
crazy.
royal and ended up saving an oak tree there right around the traffic circle in Youngsville.
Well,
But also saving, when we approached the Youngsville City Council with the idea of moving the tree, it kind of stunned them. And, how do you move a 200-year-old oak tree, And thanks to one of our members, and here's the one we moved, Mr. Al, we moved it over a mile because it was in the wrong place. It was sitting right in the right-of-way for
that was on 49 and
on Highway 90.
it was on Highway 90.
Yeah, it was on Highway 90 between Jeanerette and New Iberia, and it was right in the traffic lane for the service road. And DOTD wouldn't allow the tree to be destroyed. You have to build a road around it.
And these pictures are incredible. The significant tree moving project that it was.
Yeah.
Put a bunch of pipe structure underneath it and jacked it up until the tree could be lifted, and carefully severed the roots underneath and lifted it up onto a kind of a oil field type sled.
A gantry.
A gantry, really?
Yeah, a gantry that was right there at the port. This is.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they didn't have to go far to get one, about a mile.
Okay.
And same thing that moves those big rigs around, has 100 tires, and you move with a little controller, it moves at walking speed, and it can turn on a dime. It can, these wheels turn, and so they put it in place and jacked it and put it down and set up a pump and hired a very competent tree specialist from UL and to make sure it stayed watered and took 300,000.
What is it, Weeks Island exit?
Yeah, Weeks Island exit, yes.
On the
It's in the neutral ground in that
east
exit.
side.
Yes, the north side.
And it's raised up they raised the ground around it, so it's stands kind of like on a little earthen
hill.
pedestal. It's really wonderful. Yeah.
And the tree is done well. This is the George Rodriguez painting, which provided us the funds to deal with some of the issues of saving the oak in Youngsville.
Yeah. Well, that was kind of ironic, wasn't it, Harold? They were going to move the tree. They were going to cut
the tree
for a temporary roadway.
Yeah, a temporary, right.
So sometimes we just have to. We as citizens have to make a little noise, and work with our city fathers, which Youngsville came around, and now looking back, I'm sure they feel like it would have been totally foolish if they had indeed cut it. But once they're gone, they're gone. And that's another thing we've done, Harold, is some archiving of the oaks. There's a register of of significant
Right,
oak
yes.
trees of a certain size,
16 inches.
16,
Well, it's 16 in diameter, which would make it,
not inches.
16 inches in diameter is the size. So the girth is 5 times 16. So it's like 30, around 42 inches, something like that, 40 inches in circumference at chest height. And that's a kind of rough rule of thumb about registering these trees. And it's just a registry of live oak trees. And
Who had started that catalog years ago? Was it
UL, Dr. Stevens, the head of UL.
Okay.
Who planted, at the turn of the century, planted all the oaks on the campus.
Yeah.
And planted them from seed, amazingly. 3
That's
seeds
amazing,
to
yeah.
a hole, and from a mighty oak grows an acorn, grows the mighty oak. But somebody's got to plant them, and so and then he set up the historical register of oaks. And about 2 or 3 years ago, we were looking for the biggest oaks, and some of them, the 10 biggest oaks of Acadiana, of course. The cathedral oak is one we all think about, but there's oak quite a bit larger than the cathedral oak. I think the cathedral oak is like 28 inches and 28 feet in circumference, and
That was throwing me off earlier, but I'm with you now.
the Blanchette oak by the Larrabee Pit was like 34 and a half, and I understand there's a bigger tree near Lake Pinier. I'm trying to locate it, but rumor has it that's the biggest in Acadiana.
Wow.
It's kind of in a forested setup, so maybe not as obvious as some of the trees, but you look at the preservation of these trees is so important. The cathedral oak was about to go, and because so many people would come to visit it, they would walk under it and pounded the dirt into concrete consistency where it could no longer get nutrients. So they planted ferns. There's a bunch of volunteers.
And bordered around, so you can't walk
so
there
you can't
anymore.
walk into the,
Yeah.
and that saved that tree.
That's amazing.
Restored. So we do have to take care of them. Even a mighty oak, can be damaged by overburdening the roots.
It hasn't, it's been more than once that it's happened at Acadian Village. I've talked to people, and usually they're often people from France, but they're from people from Europe who are amazed at the oak trees in our area and the magnitude of the trees that we take for granted and sometimes chop down without any care. But it's not, it's somewhat unusual for them to have trees of that stature just as everyday trees in their environment, and they're really quite impressed. America's a wonderful country if you think about the bounty that we've inherited, and it's entrusted to us to take forward and to preserve. And
we take them for granted, and that there, along with the registry of oaks, there's a registry of cypress trees, and about 5 or 6 years ago, the Sierra Club had an event in Lake Falls Point Park, and so we went and measured 10 trees and then boiled them to determine the age, and 6 of the 10 were over 1,000 years old.
Whoa.
With 2 1,400 plus. And this was just 10 trees we just kind of at random that we could get around them, and these are probably not the oldest trees in that region.
How do you take a plug that allows you to extract?
Well, the trees are mostly hollow.
Okay.
So you first of all measure the circumference,
Okay.
and then you drill what you can, so you get so many growth rings per inch. And from the circumference, you know the diameter. And there's some guesstimates, so forth, but you come up with an estimate probably within 5% of the actual life of the tree. And
Makes you
so-
wonder what the Atchafalaya Basin
Well,
was.
for sure,
before
these trees,
before it was harvested, huh?
you know, not only our canoes paddled under them, but the Indians' canoes paddled
Yeah.
under them. And so what
Can
a-
you envision what it might have been, Harold?
Well, it was,
What the Atchafalaya Basin was
Wow.
before lumbering?
oh gosh, you know,
You
the
see-
lumbering, it was just amazing because, you know, they thought, well, it takes cypress too long to grow, and we made the same decision with longleaf pine, a beautiful longleaf pine of North Louisiana. And cypress and pine, they both take 30 to 40 years to grow. And so we have much faster growing varieties. So, but nobody wanted to replant them.
Mm.
But if they had replanted them, the cypress industry went for about 50 years. So had they replanted as they went, we'd still be harvesting cypress.
Mm.
And, you know, we just cut them like, you know, there was no tomorrow.
Well, I think that the early settlers could look at a landscape and imagine there was no limit, you know, but
Right.
a little foresight would have been healthy at that point.
Yeah.
That's what makes somebody like, was it President Stevens at UL?
Yes,
Such an important person, you know, that kind of ability to see, I mean, to build, to make such a beautiful campus, you know.
and at the same time, in New Orleans, St. Charles and Carrollton, they did the same thing.
Okay.
These were turn-of-the-century plantings. And so those trees in New Orleans, St. Charles and Carrollton, and the oaks around the university at UL are turn-of-the-century, you know, 19th to 20th century period that they were planted. And somebody had the wisdom to do it, you know, so set an example for us all, you know, to look at, you know, nature and say we are blessed with a climate that allows pretty rapid growth of trees, you know, amazingly. So, let's see, we have a call.
What's the flashing lights, sir?
Yes, sir. Let's see if we can get that. You're on the air. Can we help you?
Yes, Harold. This is Dick. Just wondering if I-29, the connector goes through, will there be a lot of trees sacrificed to this project?
You know, we've kind of looked at that. You know, they want to build it to the rail yard. Well, of course, nothing would grow there, I don't think, very well because it's highly contaminated. Yes, there certainly would be some loss of trees. And the most glaring loss is the one at Northgate Mall, the one that's in the middle of the thruway. My dad's partner in business, Mr. W.B. Frances, owned a farm that tree was on. And he insisted on saving that oak tree. And they did. That was part of his sale agreement with the OTD to save that tree. Now, if we go to overpass, that tree will have to be moved, and I think that's their intent to move it. They're not going to destroy the tree. So that would probably be one of it. But, you know, that type of construction would take a lot of trees because there are ramps, up and down ramps all along the way. Big ramps over there at Kali Saloom. There's 5 ramps there that would no doubt take out a bunch of trees. Somebody built a motel over there and took out all kinds of trees. Some of them were railroad trees. Lots of them were DOTD, Louisiana Department of Transportation trees that were right along the roadway. And, you know, without permission, they just went and cut them, I guess, to make the motel more visible, whatever. So that's the kind of the point in you know, inevitably, growth and highways and so forth take trees, and the thing to do is be cognizant of that loss, kind of evaluate and enumerate that loss, and plant the trees to, you know, to take their place, and with an idea of no net loss of trees in the community. So I hope that answers your question, Vic. Thank you for calling in.
Here, there's always this way.
Yeah. So he brings out a very important, construction takes its toll, and you can, it can be residential construction, but streets and roads, trees get in the way. But hopefully if we plant enough of them, we'll succeed in that goal of no net loss of trees. And one of the things we've encouraged outdoorsmen and hunters to do is to, when they go to the woods squirrel hunting or deer hunting, bring a pocket of acorns with you. Because the acorns are definitely available when the hunting season's on, and don't come back with them. Ideally, you push the leaves aside and drop 3 acorns and step on them and put the leaves back so the squirrels won't be eating the acorns. But ran into a hunter from Franklin, and I'd mentioned how these oak trees all over the wildlife management area near Mid Point, kind of in the southern basin, how these oak trees were growing all over the place. And he said, it's not by accident. He said the hunters of Franklin adopted this policy a long time ago.
All right.
They'd bring a pocket of acorns with them
That's a
and
good
wouldn't
idea.
come back with them, and it's a low-cost thing. In line with that, the scouts got 10 gallons of acorns, mostly from live oaks, and planted over a 5-mile stretch of levee from Lake Falls Point Park to Sandy Cove. And there were really 4 rows along the edge of the water on both sides, then along the edge of the clearing right away. So there were 4 lines that we planted these oaks, and they seem, I don't know, we might have had a 1% at success, but the oaks are sprouting all over the place.
That's great. Harold.
Very low-cost technology, easy to do. And we camping in the basin, we always bring acorns with us and plant them. Something
that Vic's call caused me to remember is that wasn't there a bioremediation in New Iberia where an old filling station site with a leaking tank they used trees to try to help clean the soils of the property?
The trees were used in Abbeville at an old filling station site, and trees are being used currently at the site. It's only 0.2 of an acre that they spent almost $3 million on.
Ooh.
And it's a very small station. This was a station that had 2 pumps. And, a very small in-town station right on the Bayou Teche. And they removed the soil, the contaminated soil, down to 35 feet.
Mm.
And then they had to put a liner, and then put the new soil, and then they have to have monitors. And it's kind of a little mini park, but they have air monitors because they're always concerned about benzene and toluene and
So it's really not that the trees,
ethylbenzene.
the trees
do, especially close to the surface contaminants. And there's a tree planting in Abbeville for a very similar station. And that project involves groundwater pumping, where they pump the water and spray it, and things like benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene, xylene readily evaporate. So as it sprays, the contaminants evaporate into the atmosphere, where we breathe it instead of drinking it. So these are tough issues, tough problems, and
It's tough to live
that's
in
what
a-
they're dealing with in
clean
the
up the
rail
world.
yard. The Lafayette Southern Pacific Union Pacific Rail Yard is about 40 acres, and it started in the 1880s, the early 1880s, where it became a major overhaul site for the steam trains, for refueling all the trains, virtually all the trains that were in the very busy corridor between New Orleans and Houston, had to stop for water. Old trains could only run about 300 miles on water, and they had real problems if they ran out of water. It would condemn their boiler, and so that was a real bad thing when that happened. And so they had to have water, and Lafayette became overhaul and rewatering, refueling station. And they weren't real careful back in those days. They did a lot of, switching around. And, train, you can't turn it around very easily. So wait a minute, you have to bring the filling station to the train. You on the air? Can we help?
Yes, Harold. Yes, Harold, this is Vic again. You opened up an interesting subject.
Great.
If it costs so much to clean up that little mess over there in New Iberia, what would it cost to clean up the mess in Lafayette?
Oh, that's an unknown, and, there's some limited borings there, and contamination down as 43, 44 feet. But you don't know whether it's over the entire 40 acres. It might be 20 acres of the 40 has this deep contamination. So where the old ponds, where the old dump ponds were, in the dump pond, I can say this because I was there. My uncles worked there. My uncle Alfred was the chief mechanic at the roundhouse. And we'd go over there and watch them work, how they made parts, and watch them, push stuff into the pond. A big crane would push a damaged tank car because it couldn't be fixed from a derailment. No telling what was in it. And then just, they'd have these little carts full of transformers, and they'd dump them and all in these ponds. And I would guess all that stuff is still there. So every train that was overhauled, and they could work 8 at a time, the boiler and the firebox was lined with asbestos. And when they removed the sheet metal, the asbestos flaked and came all apart, and it had to be replaced. And that was thrown in a pond. The pond was about 100 yards from the roundhouse and the mechanic shop. And so there's something I watched and observed. And, when they shut down the site, they didn't clean that up. They just packed dirt into it and pumped the liquid off, and there was not much of a cleanup. But all the pipes and the tanks, there's over 200 tanks there. There's dynamite storage there that nobody's found yet. And so this could be an exciting thing to fix up. But it's a ticking time bomb.
But already, Harold, aren't we seeing? I went to the meeting at the main library the other night where they were talking about water quality in Lafayette, and they've 2 different years. I think the first one was 2012, and then again in 2015. They found trace minerals that are associated with this contamination from the surface.
Yes,
and
that
already
yep.
Coming into the Lafayette water wells. And obviously there are very low levels that people don't need to worry about just yet. But the part that bothers me is that it's a progression. First it was found in one well, and then in 3 others 3 years later, or a couple of years later. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the city water wells are very deep in the aquifer. Is that correct?
Some of them are. The ones next to the railroad aren't. And the contaminant dichlorobenzene, which is a volatile organic compound found around oil a lot. But they found that in the wells right next to the Salvation Army. So they know that that product was definitely in the railroad site. A bunch of other stuff that are questionable that could be there that they're probably not testing for. And this TCE, trichloroethylene, is a solvent that they washed every train down with. They sprayed it, and it was solvent. It would degrease it, and then they would steam clean it after that. And once the train was overhauled, they'd take it to the paint shop and sandblast old lead paint off and put some new lead paint on. And this went on for 80 years. So all that stuff was laying on the ground, washing into the soil, washing off, getting into the Vermilion for sure in that watershed, and heading down to the crawfish ponds and to the shrimp grounds and to the oysters. And so, a little bit goes a long way. These volatile organic compounds, many of them are toxic to through ingestion. They're toxic through inhalation. When you spray your shower, this stuff is evaporating and you're breathing it, and through dermal contact with your skin. So then if it's going through your shower and so forth, it's also landing in the bayou, and it's also landing in the food products that we eat, in the crawfish and everything else down there. So big question about these products, is it bioaccumulative? We almost lost the eagles and the pelicans because we had engine, I think, that was dumped in the water in Memphis at super low level, in parts per trillion, but it ends up in the food that the eagle and the pelicans ate, and in parts per billion, and so it's bioaccumulative. And some of these products may be the same. So to say it's in parts per billion is not a problem may be a stretch. So thank you so much for your input on that. This is a real ticking environmental disaster in our community. It should have been addressed 60 years ago, and now there's enough attention going to it, it probably will be addressed because there's a lawsuit dealing with it. So thank you, Vic. Ticking time bomb in our community should have been tended to a long time ago. And Lafayette itself has a problem site, the Grant Street Power Plant. In 1897, we built the Grant Street Power Plant, and that was a significant factor in getting UL to locate here in Lafayette, because we were way ahead of our time with a 105 megawatt electric plant that used the same fuel as the trains did. So the steam production on the power plant, the trains were exactly the same fuel.
And the same process, really,
Same
too.
process,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely.
So that was the water dependency you were mentioning earlier, and the fact that
Yep.
the trains could go only so far. And then you were talking about the how the filling station had to go to the train. So
Right, you couldn't turn the train around, and it would stop to either pick up cars or drop off cars, and then passengers were picked up and dropped off. So the train ended up right near, a tanks assembly that put water and all that. They needed water, they needed fuel, and they needed sand. So all that was done while passengers were let on and off, or
and
while
the
they were.
sand, Harold?
The sand was used for two things. A train didn't have enough traction to move without sand being dropped on the drive wheels.
So heavy, huh?
So, it wouldn't move.
Metal on that.
And so then they needed to purge the fuel lines going to the burners. And so those were the main two purposes of sand. But water, of course, they had to have. And fuel, they could run 600 miles, 700 miles on fuel, but the water, they only had capacity to run about 300, 350 miles. So that was very important. We got a call. Let's see. You on the air? Can we help?
Yes. We talk about this being a disaster, and my question is, we just had a big Y49 meeting and invited every one of our council persons. We invited our mayor, president. We also invited the mayors of all of the surrounding cities. And when the roll call was made, there was not one of them present. We know they all know that this is a problem for them, all the contamination that they're wanting to uproot and put a highway through to dig it all up. What are we thinking of? Why isn't this public standing up and screaming about what needs to be done? I mean, it's our children, it's our grandchildren, it's our children's children forever. Can Lafayette wake up? Can our public officials wake up? I'm going to let you answer that. I'm going off.
Well, you make some very important points that, we this community should have been dealing with this when the railroad closed. It should have been dealing when the railroad was operating, because they were doing some unkindly things. You know, these dump ponds, these dump pits are still there. A bunch of these dump pits are still there. You see the garbage sticking out of them. When you go walk around the site, you got all kinds of stuff, you know, going towards Opelousas on that old track, between Mudd and Walmart. That whole area is, you know, just all kinds of garbage stuff left behind by the railroad, including old trucks that are falling apart that'll never run again. So why we let this go on in our community is we have all kinds of rules and regulations against that. We wouldn't let anybody, you know, have real estate with, you know, garbage stuck all over the place, dump pits, trees and weeds growing all over the place, providing home to the homeless, so to speak. They got tent city in some of those areas.
Well, Harold, what do they take us for, country bumpkins, that we just sit back and let a national company like the railroad, you know, Southern Pacific, I guess it is, just leave their wastes behind and assume that it's our problem?
You know, other communities around the country haven't tolerated this. You know, all over the railroads have cleaned up their old steam train operations. They were filthy operations, and you know, I know Houston has cleaned up, supposedly cleaned up New Orleans. There was one in Baton Rouge, and one in Shreveport. All those have been cleaned. Lafayette's the only major site in the state that has not been cleaned. And
So
of
the
course,
hubs-
that's a subject of a federal lawsuit.
The hub city of pollution, huh?
Right.
The hub city of filth.
It was the hub city. You got that name because to get on a passenger train between Houston and New Orleans, they didn't stop everywhere. They needed to come to Lafayette. And so all the surrounding towns, people got on the train in Lafayette. 5 trains a day going to New Orleans and 5 trains a day going to Houston. And very much the center of our town was the railroad depot. And it employed thousands of people, you know,
Isn't
over
that
the
why
years.
all the streets downtown make that funny turn? And what was a grid
Yeah.
laid out to a certain, with a certain axis,
The-
changed radically when
Right.
the railroad came through town and everything had 90 on the rails.
The main street of town went from the front of the cathedral around the courthouse square. That was the main street of town by the present library, Old Methodist Church. The railroad comes and all that changed. All of a sudden, it's all moving in the direction of the depot, because that was the meeting point. That's where everybody came, waited for trains, waited for visitors to come. And so that was the economic hotspot of town. It wasn't way over by the city hall and, you know, by the courthouse now. The whole town shifted in that direction. And it was quite an economic, a great economic importance to the city of Lafayette, because it employed, you know, enormous workforce that worked 24 hours a day. I think everybody in town had a cousin or uncle or relative that worked the railroad. My father worked for it, my grandfather worked for the railroad, 2 of my uncles, and a bunch of my cousins worked for the railroad. So, very important part of the economy over the years, but they sure left Lafayette holding the bag, so to speak. And it, you know, there's the implication with this highway that the highway would buy this yard and pay to fix it. You know, that shouldn't be on the taxpayer's nickel. That's on the railroad's nickel. That is their baby. They can have to deal with it, and that's the subject of a lawsuit. The Salvation Army and other property owners around there have filed suit, and they're looking for a cleanup. The international office of the Salvation Army in London, when the local office sought approval, it said not only is it approved, but you have a public mandate. You know about this, and you're in a position to make a difference, and this is super important for future generations that we deal this thing that should have been dealt with, generations back. So we're proud of all the citizens who've stepped forth and asked the questions, why do we have to put it here?
Well, it seems now that a little more pressure might be indicated or dictated or begged. Seems to me, I know why, after listening to the presentation the other night, I'm going to write my city councilman and I'm going to say, I'm concerned about my water. Could you start investigating and find out why we're not getting a cleanup over here? It just seems like, it seems like everybody's so hell-bent on having a high-rise interstate run through the middle of our town that they forget about the fact that we're going to be left holding a chemical bag.
Well,
that's
public health,
polluting our,
you can imagine, the economic impact of polluted water. We provide water for Broussard, Youngsville, Carroll Crow, and a lot of the surrounding subdivisions, as well as the city of Lafayette. We provide 20 million gallons a day of water from the Chico Aquifer, and
well, isn't it a sole source aquifer?
Absolutely.
I'm talking about
that's the only. We could get it from the Vermilion Bayou.
This is a sand body that carries fresh water and that covers the entire southwestern portion of the entire state of Louisiana. It's of an incredible magnitude.
20 parishes plus.
If I don't know at what depth they're pulling for the Lafayette city water, but if already the same contaminants that are found shallow are being found in our water, albeit at very, very low parts per billion or million, I think it was, the fact is it's coming in. If it's coming in and you've got a suction for fresh water to customers, it's going to continue to come in.
We've taken up so much water. There's, according to Dr. Bruce Dorling, who was on this program, there's two major cones of depression in the Chico. One is the Lake Charles area, and the second is Lafayette. So with that being said, you're taking so much water continuously that you pull in water into your aquifer, and
it's no longer the gravitational, slow, geological time cleansing of the waters.
That's right. Over time,
sucking.
Over time, the Chico was drained from north to south, all the way to the Gulf.
And weren't the feeder parishes up?
Cheniere Teague had artesian wells, and so did Marshall. And I don't know if they're still flowing or not. But
how about Beaver Park? Wasn't that an artesian?
No, they had wells at Chagua Springs, where the swimming pool, where the Surrey Bridge.
See, that's what I'm used to. Where I lived in Florida, the limestone aquifer allowed there to be those freshwater springs. It's the same water in the Chico aquifer. It's just
absolutely it's coming to the surface, and
it's hard to swim in a sand body.
and it's really the Chico Atchafalaya aquifer. Its main recharge is Atchafalaya, Mississippi, and it's an enormous resource of enormous value, and we have to pollute it as has been done all over the country. Phoenix, Arizona, has a groundwater system with 2 million people that was polluted by trichloroethylene, a solvent used in assembling televisions and computers. And it was put there by Motorola. They dumped the waste into ponds, just like the railroad did. And that's what we clean all these trains with, the same product, trichloroethylene. And I don't know if that's being tested in our water, but trichloroethylene is toxic to it's a carcinogen, and it was discovered in Phoenix because childhood leukemia was going off the charts, and the medical community realized something was wrong, and it took years to determine what the problem was. So now they're having to clean up the groundwater under Phoenix. They're getting water from 20 miles away. But Flint, Michigan was the same thing. They're having an enormous problem in Miami because the Florida Power and Light needed more water for their nuclear power plants, so they dredged the canal that we're getting ocean water from, deeper and wider, and they broke through barriers, so the salt water from the ocean is going right into the drinking water of Miami, 2 million people, plus the tritium, that's the radioactive isotope that's associated with nuclear power, that's landing in the system. So Florida Power and Light is spending mega millions creating a cone of depression, trying to keep the salt water from going right into the drinking water for millions of people. And it's got farmers angry too, because they use that same water to grow tomatoes and greenhouses and so forth. So these things have happened all the country, and the idea that it can't happen here is just so much baloney. These things are just one test away from verification. And
So I guess
public health is a lot more important than highways. You
if
think about
every
this highway that's
citizen-
being built right now, it will serve no extra traffic. It may move traffic a little faster, but we already have an existing road. It's already the same lane capacity, and certainly we can improve our roads, but
So it's gonna take individual citizens writing to or getting in contact with their elected city council members, expressing their concerns and raising a ruckus, because I'm afraid that if they don't hear it from their population, the population of the city, they're gonna assume everything's fine and carry on with their plans.
and it's most likely those contaminants are going into these wells. 3 of the wells are close to the railroad track, and they, according to Dr. Bruce Darling, they receiving water as young as 30, 40, 50 years old. Some of the wells way off by the golf course are deeper and have much older water. It's probably a lot more secure from surface pollutants. So these things should be tested well by well, and where a well does have a problem with incoming insults, chemical insults, then it should be, turned off and replaced in a much safer place. So something that's quite doable. But the importance is an awareness that there may be a problem, of monitoring well by well to make sure that it's not, because what happens is you draw this well water and you mix it all together when you chlorinate it and put it into the plumbing system. So, but I want to commend you for all your work with Trees Acadiana. I think that's so much. If you want to look at economic development and economic improvement in a community, the first thing you do is clean it up and beautify it. So, and beautification, trees have to be a major part of that. Trees are a major part of our air quality, cleaning it up, so to speak. And the more trees we plant, the more healthy our air quality is. And of course, trees benefit so many things: wildlife, retention of water, and water absorption, minimizing flood impacts, and just go down the list of all the benefits.
Purifying the air we breathe.
Purifying the air we breathe, providing habitat for butterflies and squirrels.
Simple
and
shade
food,
on a hot day.
Shade on a-
place to rest, place to talk to
shading
a
your
friend.
home so your air conditioning doesn't
Yeah,
run
that's it.
all the time. And
Blocking solar
blocking the
panels
wind.
so you don't
Yep.
have to get any of that electricity from this. Oh, 1A. No.
yeah, right. So I want to commend you, Dennis, and your efforts. You might share. How do we join Trees Acadiana?
Oh, goodness gracious. A lot of times we have
We have a website.
we have a partially we have a website. It's fairly antiquated and in need of some help to bring it up to the current times. It's a historical document for the most part. You can see what we've done in the past, and there are some contact numbers that should still be good. Anyone who cares to can call one of the members or get in touch with one of us. We meet on the is it the third Thursday of the month, and we're having a planning soon. Should be published in the local activity pages of the newspapers and the wherever they post that type of thing. And we'll be doing that planting north on Pont de Mouton.
And we're doing a planting out at Seminole Point State Park. It's one of them coming up, and another planting on University right on the Vermilion Bayou. Citrus and oaks. And remind you that we do give trees away, and we'll be potting our selection of trees soon. They'll be available for the first time probably at Festival International at the Boy Scout Information Booth. We usually give out 100, 150, 200 trees, and we get wonderful compliments on how wonderful these trees grow and so forth. So they're free, your only obligation is to promise to plant them. And so again, Dennis, thank you for all your wonderful work with Trees Acadiana. You're improving, beautifying Lafayette, and helping scouts get to their eagle rank. I think the 2 plantings coming up, you'll provide the citrus.
Major team.
Well,
effort.
you and I went all the way to Plaquemine to get them, so.
Yeah, that was a rough ride. You had to put
All
up
right.
with me and I with you, but
Yeah.
we
Oh,
made it
yeah.
all right.
So thanks again, Dennis,
All
for
right.
the end of our program. So appreciate everybody calling in. Got it?